Let's jump to this story, which is oh so spicy. We got this one from the Daily Mail. Before I read the headline, I just want to say, do not take medical advice from podcasters. Talk to trusted medical professionals about what's right for you. Because the Daily Mail says getting Pfizer's COVID booster and flu vaccine on the same day may raise the risk of a stroke, FDA says. The FDA says it, okay?
The FDA?
The Food and Drug Administration found the preliminary link while scouring vaccine injury databases after a separate safety concern was raised about Pfizer's jab. Earlier this month, one of the country's vaccine surveillance systems flagged a possible association between the Omicron-specific shot and an elevated risk of ischemic stroke among seniors over 65. FDA officials who have been investigating the link said most of the patients had also received their flu shot on the same day, which might be a factor. Millions of Americans got both shots at the same time this winter following a major public health push by the White House. In September, Dr. Ashish Jha, White House COVID response coordinator, said, quote, "I believe this is why God gave us two arms, one for the flu shot and the other for the COVID shot." Oh. Yo, wait a minute. I mean, I don't know if this is definitively the cause of why we're hearing about more strokes, why more excess death or heart attacks. But the White House was telling people to get both. It's quoted. And the FDA is now saying there may be a link here. So I don't know. I guess how long do you think it'll be until they come out and definitively be like, oh yeah, about all that. That was correct. So, like, is the FDA wrong right now to suggest this? I'll frame it that way for our friends over at YouTube.
At least they put it out there. I mean, I do think we're in this weird space right now where I think our ruling classes realize they got this whole COVID thing completely and totally wrong. But because of, pride, them worrying about like any kind of repercussions, but then also just the whole sunken cost fallacy, like you continue to double down. It's really hard to say, you know what, we got this wrong, especially since we were so harsh on all the random people out there who said, I have questions. I don't know if I want to do that.
This is funny because it's like it's a casino dad joke. When you lose a bet, you go, well, you know what they say, when you lose a bet, just gamble twice as much because you're not supposed to do that.
That's how the casinos are built.
That's right. And this is kind of crazy for me to see this story. I mean, we had so many crazy stories just come out in the past couple of hours when we started this show. And what had happened was, I think it was a couple weeks ago, they said that they found a potential signal between, I think it was strokes. I'm not sure. There was a signal between vaccines and some negative side effect, but that they're not sure if it was actually correct. Now it looks like they're saying, the FDA is saying this, that they went in and they started looking and said, hey, wait a minute, maybe it's because people are getting both these shots at the same time.
Yeah.
That could explain a lot.
I mean, I feel like the FDA wouldn't come out and even give a potentially there's maybe something there unless they had to, right? Like they don't want to cede any territory on this front.
It's not just that. I mean, imagine you work for the FDA and you're sitting there looking at this document that says this thing and you're thinking, I'm going to lose my job at Pfizer when I retire from the FDA if I put this report out, but you really have no choice.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, like, the vaccine, if this was any other vaccine or booster, I think they would say, hey, wait, stop. We don't know what's going on here. Let's have a pause. Let's study it. But because they've invested so much in it right now, all we get is these, like, kind of willy-nilly warnings because it's the sacred COVID vaccine.
Well, I half agree. Yeah. With Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, they did put a stop on those because I think, what was it, AstraZeneca was the blood clot one?
Yeah, AstraZeneca.
And then Johnson & Johnson
was blood clots, but it was only the one dose, and there were other comorbidities that were at play.
Yeah, they like the U.S. doesn't have AstraZeneca, I'm pretty sure. And then you want to fact check this one? Yep. I'm pretty sure the U.S. they said, hey, we're going to put a pause on the Johnson & Johnson one because of a risk of blood clotting or something like that. Yeah. And then WebMD, I think it is, and the American Heart Association have come out and said that that myocarditis is a rare side effect of the mRNA vaccines. So it seems like a lot of the fears people had early on are now just basically being affirmed by powerful institutions and health organizations. That being said, I will stress, they also add they're extremely rare side effects, but they do find these links. So I want to make sure people don't, look, I know a lot of people are outright people are like either everyone must be vaccinated or totally anti-vax. Right. It's like it's fine to be somewhere in the middle and just be like, look, talk to a doctor. COVID could be causing this. It could be a combination of things. It could be, like you said, they've invested too heavily in this and they won't back down.
Johnson & Johnson the U.S. pulled Johnson & Johnson because of a link to blood clots in December 2021, and then AstraZeneca was paused in Europe by a bunch of different countries in May of 2022.
I think isn't some country stopping the vaccine, the mRNA vaccine for like people under 29? Was that Sweden or something? One of those Scandinavian countries.
Well, there was a whole wave of countries that paused COVID vaccines. I think it was Pfizer specifically for young men because they saw the link to myocarditis and all of the heart issues. And then they kept raising it. It went from being like, oh, well, 12 to 18. And then I think in some countries it went all the way up to like 45.
We got a problem with this. If the FDA is really putting the story out, because if they're saying that a combination of vaccines can cause problems, then we've got to have an inquiry on, have we done studies on the combination of all vaccines? I don't think you really, I think it's very difficult to do this.
If the conditions were different, I don't think that there's any question about the fact that the FDA would be like, stop everything, stop, you can't put this out, blah, 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 et cetera. I think that goes without saying. The reason that they're so tentative about this is because they, for so long, were pushing so hard and demonized the population and called people all the names that you could possibly imagine. And now they're like, oh, uh-oh.
Well,
because they've already destroyed their credibility.
Right. And they think that they're defending you from terrible conspiracy theorists, right?
Yeah.
Saying like, well, we can't give up this front because then the conspiracy theorists have won. And they'll tell you all sorts of horrible things. It actually reminds me of conversations people have about preservatives in foods, right? Like if you eat store manufactured food or whatever all day, you're actually putting a ton of stuff into your body you don't know about. And I don't know anything about it really, but like it is something you wonder. I can only imagine putting lots of different types of vaccines that you can't in a consistent way test their interactions. It's a gamble.
You can test their interactions. It's just a question of, have we?
Well, and also like you can't, it would be difficult to reproduce study after study after study that are able to consistently test them.
Let's talk about the actual challenge here. I mean, the permutations of vaccine combinations is probably in the billions or trillions. So we actually do have a challenge in this idea of health technology. We make vaccines. Most of the vaccines that people get have been tested and tried out for decades. We seem to be doing all right. I've gotten a whole bunch of crazy shots when I was traveling the world. I'm totally okay. And so I know there's a lot of people who are like staunchly anti-vax. We had Candace Owens on. She talked about this on the members only show. She gave her opinions on this. But the question is, every time we come out with a new medication, it would be impossible to, not even vaccines, but any drug. So let's say they come out with a new painkiller. They're going to have to test what happens if someone's on this painkiller and drug A, drug B, drug C, drug D, drug E, drug F. I mean, the combinations are going to be in ridiculous numbers. Now, they do have like counterindications like, hey, don't take this if you're taking this. So to the best of their abilities, they do track the stuff. But for the most part, it seems what happens is they give someone a painkiller. The person's also on a blood thinner. They then see the person have a negative reaction. They then, track this and say, hey, over the past 1,000 combinations of these drugs, we saw negative reactions. So it's like the studies are happening in real time, essentially. I guess what I'm trying to say is any attempt we're going to have at making drugs or medical technology is going to run into side effect problems.
It is.
And how we navigate that stuff, I don't know.
I think just being honest, I mean, I think the reason why we're seeing so many people now that are outright like militant anti-vaxxers is because they've been lying to us about so many different things regarding COVID from the beginning that now it's gone the completely different direction where people are just like, I don't want any more vaccines. I don't trust anything you guys are saying. And that's pretty dangerous because I think if like a real legit lethal virus hit the U.S. shores tomorrow, there's a lot of people, probably myself included, that would be like, I don't believe you. I'm not going to take that.
We talked about this a few years ago. Ian brought up a really great point. We were all like, no lockdowns are wrong. And he said, what if it was an airborne Ebola?
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, that's an interesting point. But ultimately the conclusion we came to was, look, if you choose to go out during a pandemic, it's your choice. And if you don't want to, stay inside, lock your doors. But there is an interesting question I'd have, right? A lot of people are staunchly anti-vax, but my question legitimately, maybe I'll do a poll on this. I don't know if I can phrase it, get enough characters to make a poll on this one. But people have gotten COVID. Some people have said it's not that bad. Some people have said it was pretty bad. Some people said it was apocalyptically bad. For me, it was nightmarishly bad. It was the worst illness I've ever gotten. I've had the flu before and I was pale and shaking.
Yeah.
I got COVID. I actually called a hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was bad. My temperature was really low. My breathing was very heavy. And it was pain all over. And then I ended up getting monoclonal antibodies. I've told the story a million times. My question is this. For the people who are not trusting of the government, if you actually witnessed people suffering Ebola symptoms, like you walk outside into the streets and people have blood coming out of their eyes and they're hacking up black and they're going, and they're falling over. and then the government came in a truck and they were like, we've got the vaccine. Quick, you need to get it now. Would you guys accept it?
Well, think of it.
Oh, no, I just think there's been so much trust burned that you would have to see. I mean, people nowadays, not everybody, but I think there would be a significant portion of our population who would be like, I don't care if you put it on the news. I need to see it with my own eyes. Until then, I think you guys are screwing me.
Well, no, but that's what I mean. Let's say you personally saw people outside hacking up black and bleeding from their eyes and then slumping over and convulsing. And then a truck pulls up and they come out and they say, Mr. Kent, we've got vaccines for you in your neighborhood. Please come. We're going to administer them to you. Would you say okay to that?
Yeah, I think at that point, that makes sense.
It's tough, though. It is still a hard question. Some people would say no. I understand why they'd say no. They'd be like, dude, I don't know what's going on.
I mean,
in where was it? Nigeria? Where was the Ebola thing happening? Do you remember that a few years ago?
Yeah.
6, 7 years ago?
Ebola Valley. It's like near Congo.
So people were running from the doctors.
Yeah.
And the doctors are trying to stop the spread of Ebola. And the people are like, I don't trust you. And so they would flee and then actually spread more Ebola.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that the situation would really boil down to the context. If you're looking at people that are vomiting blood and stuff, the risk is probably far greater of dying from that than from a vaccine. The reason people are worked up about COVID is because COVID for a lot of people was not deadly if you were in good health and you didn't have what's contributing factors and stuff. And that's part of why people were upset. It's like, I had to take this. These have risks. I was healthy, or I am healthy. I probably wouldn't have a problem. So.
You know what I kind of feel like? The highest risk demographic was the older people, people with comorbidities. So it really does feel like politicians who are scared for themselves told everyone else they have to do it so that they would be better off.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known people, that's how like some young moms get told they need to get the flu vaccine, right? They'll say like there's a bad flu outbreak in our city and you have a newborn baby, and if you don't pass down like through breastfeeding or whatever the antibodies for it, then your baby is at risk, and an infant at this age can't handle the flu, right? And so they get the flu vaccine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the flu vaccine, I'm just giving it as an example, when maybe they would have opted not to because they felt like they are actually protecting someone else. I think that's how the government sold it to a lot of people. If you have elderly parents, do you want to be the one that gave them COVID?
Right.
Or do you want to be kept away from them? Like, it put people in a really difficult position. And unfortunately, COVID was not a clear-cut example of how bad the symptoms were, right? Like, if someone's vomiting up black goo and bleeding from their eyeballs, like, okay, I guess I'm in. But like,
there's a limit.
Right, but also like, a really bad fever can be extremely dangerous, right? Sure. A high enough fever, you can have seizures. Yeah. So there are things that aesthetically don't look as bad, but they are also terrible and can be devastating.
The reason I bring this up before we go on to the next story is we had this Project Veritas expose of a guy who is either a consultant working at Pfizer as a director or a director at Pfizer, saying that he believes the Wuhan lab leak is likely where this came from because COVID couldn't have come from somewhere else or whatever. That's his opinion. In 2020, this was the big theory. People were saying that they believed it was a bioweapon leaked from a lab.
Yeah.
If that theory were true, then it makes more sense that the governments of the world, in panic, desperately tried to make a vaccine to stop a bioweapon that leaked from a lab, in which case the vaccine, it makes sense why they're like, you have to take this.
Yeah.
Because you think about it this way, Fauci is providing this funding. The lab leak thing happens, and then he's probably going like, oh man, that thing I made is getting everywhere. We got to get a vaccine. Everybody's got to take it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then if people are having blood clots and other weird, problems, it makes more sense. Occam's razor would suggest that COVID is causing these things and not the vaccines. Because what you'd have to believe then is, if you think it was the vaccines causing it, that not only was COVID a bioweapon leak from a lab, but then after it released, they went, now let's make everything a whole lot worse. So then it's not a lab leak, it's an intentional release and a fake. Look, I'm not saying I know for sure one way or the other. I'm just saying it's way more fantastical to believe that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just don't know, right? And I can only say this. There's no functional official narrative. Like, the average person is not trusting of the government at this point because the stories just do not work for people. So the only thing I can really say is be like Joe Rogan. Find a medical professional that you trust, that can answer your questions.
Yep.
And then, you know, like I always mention, I called Joe. I always have to shout Joe out because they dragged him so much for this when his whole position was like, I called a doctor and asked them what to do. Because their position was going to the 7-Eleven parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah, get you.
I mean, for real.
Shot.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.